Justice. Good afternoon and welcome to our CBF Conversation on Justice, Missions, and Advocacy. We're delighted that you have chosen to be with us today. We are thrilled to have a panel with us today, John Mark Bowes, Christian McIver, and Laura Nelson. And they'll each introduce themselves to us in just a moment. I'm Ellen Seacrest, and I serve as the Manager of Global Mission Engagement for CBF. And we look forward to having this really important conversation with you today. John Mark, if you'll introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm John Mark Bowes. I serve as CBF's Advocacy, Engagement, and Programs Manager. That's a new title change for me recently, so it took me a second to make sure I got it correct. But I'm glad to be here with you all today.
Hi, I'm Christian McIver. I'm the Minister of Worship, Music, and the Arts at Greystone Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I've served since this past September, and I very much appreciate the invitation to be a part of this conversation. Issues of justice are one of the primary reasons that I ended up feeling called to vocational ministry about 4 years ago, before which I was a music educator in North Carolina.
And I'm Laura Nelson. I am a member of Greystone. I've been at Greystone Baptist Church since I was in the 6th grade, and now I'm 26. So I've been there for a minute, and I'm a member of our Spirit of Justice team as a representative of the congregation.
Great. Well, thank you all for being with us today. This is an important conversation, as I said, and it's one that our churches are talking more about, how justice, missions, and advocacy can all work together. And Christian, when you moved to this congregation, and I read one of your Facebook posts actually about this new role of the Spirit of Justice Committee, I was really interested in that. And John Mark's and my position is in a new role together, where we are focusing on advocacy for some of our churches that he was already doing, but how our churches can be into deeper relationships in our engagement with missions and advocacy. And so I wanted to reach out to the two of you to find out a little bit more about your committee and the functions of it, how it works. So Christian, can you tell us a little bit about that, you and Laura?
Sure. I think the Greystone's path has been somewhat similar to that of CBF, where our advocacy work has grown out of our missional relationships with Habitat for Humanity, Mark and Kim Wyatt, and the Welcome House, Together for Hope in Helena, Arkansas. Through these long-term mission and ministry partners, Greystone members started to become aware of systemic injustice, specifically related to racism and immigration. Bill Baxley, one of our members, and who has ended up being the chair of the Spirit of Justice team, also attended the Racial Equity Institute and began sharing what he had learned with our missions committee. And from that point, the motion was made to create a justice committee. It went to our leadership council, and then when the church met in a church and conference meeting, we ended up coming up with a covenant to keep the church informed all along the way. The Spirit of Justice team was created as an ad hoc team, and it was decided that would report directly to the leadership council after being approved by the church. I think it's important to note that it's been a grassroots effort from the mission team up, coming from the congregation and the church membership, not coming from the staff. Obviously, the staff will be an important part of this as we move along, but the enthusiasm and the effort to develop the team has come from the church members themselves. And Laura, if you want to add anything.
Yeah.
Sure. I think maybe the most exciting thing to me about this team is that we're all volunteers. We all just wanted to join. It's not like other committees at the church where maybe the nominating team asked you to be on it. We just decided this is important to me and I would like to be a part of it. And anybody can join it. Like anyone could jump in at any point and be a part of the work that we're doing as a small group, and then that we're then going to be doing as a congregation. And no one has a real specific background in any particular area. I am actually a children's case manager at a domestic and sexual violence services agency. So I do have a specific area of justice work that I'm passionate about. And everybody has kind of found that they're coming to the team with their own unique perspective. We've got a member who's really heavily involved with the Wyatts and has a passion for immigration justice. And then we have team members who are really passionate about environmentalism and creation care. But we don't have anybody who's like, I'm an expert in this, So I'm going to be, leading the team. We're all learning with each other. And I think that's been really exciting. And I think we've learned together quite well so far.
That's great. And I think a lot of congregations are interested, as I said, in this type of work. And so a little bit later, we'll talk about how we might actually look at forming these types of committees in our own congregations. Laura, for you, particularly as a church member and having been there for a good number of years, as you said, and a quick minute and all, how has the church moved to this type of advocacy? Whereas before it may have been the passion of a few people, but how has Greystone transitioned into really making this a forefront of your not just your ministry, but your worship as well?
Yeah, I think it's been a fairly natural progression. I think we've definitely gotten a healthy kick in the pants recently with how we're having these conversations in our larger culture. But growing up at the church, I have seen a really big passion for mission work. And I have seen that as advocacy. We haven't really put the label on it as advocacy, but we have been, in small ways advocating for the communities that we're serving. And so now we're learning about what true advocacy means and how we can work that, how we can label that as justice work and really understand what justice is and what equity is, and how we're called to do justice as a church. So I think it's been really wonderful to see the conversations play out and to see how we're changing our ministry. As a young person in the Baptist church, it can be a little frustrating for me when I'm like, but let's just move a little faster. But I do think it's important to have the conversations and make sure we're walking with each other and not dragging somebody along. So it has been really wonderful to see Greystone, to see my church put an emphasis on educating each other and wanting to be educated. So we're sharing what we know. If there's a particular person in the congregation who has specific knowledge, like when Bill Baxley went to the Racial Equity Institute, he came back with that information for us. And then we have plenty of other subject matter experts in the congregation who are helping to teach us. But there really is a strong willingness to learn and to hear and to listen to voices we haven't listened to before, and to think about what we're already doing as a congregation and how we can do that better.
That's excellent. Two key things that you said that really speak to me as a minister myself. I served in the local congregation for about 30 years. So you talk about a hot minute of being somewhere and all, but not dragging people into it and also inviting people into it are two really key pieces for a minister and for a congregation. And it's about listening to the whole. It's great if two or three people have a passion, but that's your passion and it's not necessarily the passion of the church. And so as you've talked about the growing nature of that you didn't come to this overnight, but this was a growing piece as a congregation together that moved you into that direction. So that's a great and healthy congregational move. Don't you agree, John Mark?
Absolutely. Laura, you mentioned we are growing to do this better. We're learning to do this better. And I think that's such a beautiful sentiment for communities of faith as we learn to be better communities of faith and to be more representative of God's kingdom. That's just beautiful language. So thank you for sharing that, Laura.
John Mark, the words justice and advocacy are part of your work all the time. I work specifically in church engagement for global missions and trying to help our congregations develop stronger connections to CBF, to missions, and to our field personnel. And your work specifically is in advocacy, which interprets into justice oftentimes. But why are those words often scary for people, and especially for congregations? Because we know that sometimes when we use the word advocacy, people think we're going to march, we're going to talk politics, it's going to be offensive. And in the Southern culture, oftentimes we want to leave that outside the door rather than bringing some of that in. So how do we overcome some of that, and how can the church play a bigger part in that?
Wow, Ellen, that's a really good question, and one that I wish I had 50 minutes to try to answer here, but that wouldn't quite be fair of our viewers or of my fellow participants today. So I'll try to keep my answer somewhat short. I think for quite some period of time, we've been scared of the word political. I think about this a little bit differently. The church is political by its very nature, but the church isn't partisan by its very nature. We have to work to remind ourselves that it's okay to be political. It's okay to speak into a world that needs unique Christian voices, that needs unique public witness from faith leaders, from lay leaders. I think that partisanship and the confusion between partisanship and politicalness is where some people get scared. But I think other people get scared because they don't want their church to become a place of contention. They don't want their church to be controversial. They don't want their church to be a source of challenge or what they seem division. And to that I say, I don't want that either. I don't want our churches to be places of contention, of confrontation, of division. I want our churches to be places that are unified. And I think what we can unify around is our calling to work to build the kingdom of God. So in some senses, my response to that is we shouldn't do those things. We shouldn't be controversial. We shouldn't try to avoid any sense of those kind of things. But we also have to speak out on issues that Scripture tells us to speak out on. We've talked a little bit about immigration and refugee issues, specifically in the context of Mark and Kim White and Greystone. I don't know any Scripture verses that tell us we shouldn't care for immigrants and refugees. I can't think of one. So to me, that's quite clear that our moral faith voices require us to do something about it. Require us to work to care, but then to work to advocate for better policies so that we are still caring for immigrants and refugees. For the longest amount of time, I think CBF has been a really good missions organization, and our churches are really good at missions. What we're not great at and where we can improve is taking our mission work and applying it to the public realm and figuring out how we can work to solve some of these problems. One of my dear friends in a field personnel is Scarlett Jasper. She has been advocating on behalf of poor folks in Appalachia for years before she even became a CBF field personnel. And she does it not because she gets anything from it, but because it's what she's called to do by God. I think that's pretty powerful. I think it's powerful to reclaim some of that notion of what does it mean to love God and to act on God's behalf in God's world.
I think that's exactly right. And, I love the example of Scarlett because she didn't move there to serve. She was already living there and serving. And so her understanding is far different than me moving into that community.
That's right. Which is also another hallmark of CBF Global Missions. And I think can be a hallmark of good advocacy work. And that's long-term presence, right? Like we don't ask our field personnel, we don't want our churches to try to figure out issues over the weekend or over at a retreat or to do it in a day. Like that's not how this works. That's not good, effective mission work. So, we got to find ways to continue to be that long-term presence. That's right.
Yeah. One of the Christian and Laura, you'll be interested in this. One of the things that John Mark and I are working on together is the advocacy and the encourage a church piece. And it's not to convince a church to be an advocate. It's to help us recognize what you're already doing and to partner in with you in that. And so we find that work pretty exciting because so many of our churches are already about the business of the kingdom, and kingdom work is advocacy as well as as engagement as well as loving all people. So thank you for that. Christian, you are a minister at the church there, and you are a minister to all people at that congregation as well. So tell us a little bit about how the role as worship leader, you use this missions and advocacy pieces in your work.
So like we've already discussed, I think we've tried as much as possible to introduce advocacy as a way of expanding the definition of what missions is. And in worship, particularly, we've tried to approach advocacy from a discipleship perspective with a focus on Jesus' prophetic ministry, and particularly his mission to bring good news to the poor, let the oppressed go free, bring healing and wholeness to all. We recently went through a series on justice as discipleship, and each week we tried to set this up delicately and draw people in through the music and prayers offered at the beginning of the service. These particular elements hinted at the potentially uncomfortable conversations that would come throughout the rest of the service, sort of trying to prepare people that, when we love as Christ loved, it's not always going to be a comfortable way of loving. And so we need to be prepared for that as we enter into conversations with people that we might not necessarily agree with on everything. I think what John Mark was saying regarding advocacy from a being political as opposed to partisan, I think is right on. I mean, it's, Jesus quite clearly was a political figure. And I think, to examine that in worship is, a primary way of pulling it from a scriptural basis, pulling the congregation along with us. So we've focused on creating awareness of systemic injustice through, like I said, various thematic elements in worship. Our senior pastor, Chrissy Williamson, has been involved with CBF advocacy efforts, and she often discusses contemporary justice issues in her sermons. She invites and encourages people to examine their own convictions in a healthy way that fosters respect, appreciation for, and open-mindedness towards alternate perspectives. Our minister to children and youth, April Alston, provides programming for our younger members that helps them understand that advocating for the marginalized and oppressed is a fundamental part of following Jesus. And as Minister of Worship, Music, and the Arts, I've only been here a short time, but I've tried to support our attempts to highlight advocacy as an aspect of a discipleship with my music selection for all of our choirs, which are continuing to function in a virtual format. And also the music that I regularly select and write for our worship offerings. I'm trying to make it as diverse as possible to represent the diversity of the body of Christ, and also to address these issues of justice in the music that I'm selecting.
Great. Christian, I've loved your music. I got introduced to it 2 years ago when I came to CBF as well, and you've been on some of our events and all, and it's always very meaningful. And this is a question that's not in our list of questions I was going to ask you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Through the series of events in the culture, have you seen your music shifting more in that role of advocacy as you work?
I think I kind of mentioned at the beginning, my I feel like being called to ministry was primarily came about as an aspect of me sort of realizing the systemic injustice that was all around me, and that I wanted to be able to address these issues outside of my classroom in different and more meaningful ways to me personally. And so I think if anything, my music has gotten, the lyrics that I've written have gotten more specific and less generalized. And I think that's just an effort on my part to really name the injustices that we're seeing all around us, but also to do it in a way that's not necessarily coming off as telling people what they need to believe, but always trying to relate it to scripture or the particular themes that we're dealing with in worship. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I find your music challenging in a positive way, not challenging to my beliefs, I guess, but as much as to what I'm thinking and how I'm responding, and challenging me to look within as well as, thinking about what's on the out. So thank you for that. And if you in the comment section, Christian, if you want to post a link to your music website, you're welcome to do so. I think people would really enjoy listening to some of your music.
Yeah.
One of my friends, Sarah, is on, and I know she particularly would really be interested in hearing some of your music. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Christian, it's interesting that you talk about becoming more specific and less general. I've found in my work with CBF advocacy that has helped us grow our work too, is becoming more specific and less general. So that's an interesting crossover that you have found to be true as well. So that's cool. Laura, I'm curious about your experience with the Greystone Spirit of Justice team. I want to know why you were interested in serving on this committee, why you find it to be valuable at Greystone, and why you find it to be significant for yourself as a follower of Christ.
So I told this to the team in our very first meeting, because we all kind of went around in our Zoom call and talked about why we joined the team. And I was very honest with them, and I'll be very honest with everyone here. I initially did not want to join the team. I thought about it and I was like, this seems cool. Not for me. I do enough of this outside of church. I don't want to have to be going in and, I don't want to get frustrated. Like, what if we're not all on the same page? What if we come at this from different perspectives and it's not, what if we argue with each other? I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. But the more I thought about it and I talked to some other church members, I kind of realized if I have an opportunity to be a part of this conversation, is that something I'm supposed to be doing as a Christian? Yes. So, if I have the chance to seek justice within this team, then yes, that's what I should be doing. And something I found very valuable about this specific team is it has kind of challenged my idea of what I thought the team would be to start with. I really thought okay, great. Now we think we're just going to tackle racial equity, as a small team of people, good, that's going to be super easy. But that's not what we're doing. That is a part of what we are learning and listening. I think we've discovered as a society that we haven't been listening. So our team is choosing to make a pointed effort to listen and to learn. And to be frankly honest, we're not ready to make decisions, about racial equity right now, because we haven't done the listening and we haven't done the learning. So we're putting in that work now. But things that we can go ahead and start working on and kind of put a stake in the ground, we can look at our own policies. We can look at the policies of the churches in our area and the churches in this CBF group. I don't know what the fellowship. And we can see, okay, well, what are other churches doing? What are they saying? What do their policies look like? And what can we change within our own? So, maybe we're not ready to tackle immigration reform as Greystone Baptist Church, but we can certainly say, all right, well, what does equity look like for our congregants and our visitors with disabilities? Is it easy for them to worship with us? Is it easy for them to access our building? What does justice look like for people within our congregation who have experienced sexual abuse, who have experienced domestic abuse? We know it's statistically that's happening, whether we want to, acknowledge that or not. And it has happened. And so are we prepared to minister to those people and to be community with those people? What does our policy look like? Do we have policy? So I think we're taking a hard look at all aspects of justice and what that really means kind of for anyone. And that sounds really, really broad, we're doing all these amazing things. We're still learning what the different areas we want to talk about and need to talk about are. So I think that is maybe the most important thing that we're doing right now, is just seeing how broad the scope is of what seeking justice actually means, and how we need to start listening and learning from each other.
Yeah, I think that's really spot on in a lot of ways. You all have mentioned already your work with Habitat for Humanity and how some of that has pushed Greystone into this area. And you mentioned some folks who are near and dear to my heart, Bill and Sandra Baxley. I I think the process of becoming more engaged in the work of advocacy should absolutely start with listening. It's got to start with listening to those in your community who aren't being heard. At CBF Advocacy, our logo is a microphone. And we try not to support the notion that there are voiceless people. We're not a voice for the voiceless. Everyone has a voice. We just want to pass the mic so their voice is heard, because far too often it's not. So finding those issues where your congregation is passionate, finding those issues where your congregation can speak uniquely into a faith voice is really powerful. And that might not be doing anything on a national stage, like taking up immigration reform, like you talked about, Laura. It could very well talk about how can we help provide justice for sexual abuse survivors. Maybe that's even more powerful than trying to take up some form of national response to legislation. And somehow, how can we be the presence of Christ in a unique way? Is what I think about. So thanks for that, Laura. That's really inspiring.
Yeah, indeed, it's challenging and inspiring for our own congregations to think broader than just our little silo that we're in, and to think beyond ourselves. And I think as our doors begin to reopen after majority of people are vaccinated, we're going to see a continual transition in our congregations. Unfortunately, we see a high statistic of people that won't be regular attenders anymore because they're going to stay on Zoom, or they're just going to stop coming to church. But we also know there's going to be some new people show up to church. And so recognizing, as you were talking about the disabled, making concessions for that, making it easier for people to be a part of your congregation is a great advocacy piece as well.
That's right.
John Mark, you and I both work with our field personnel, and we have some outstanding field personnel who do really wonderful work. And as I was reflecting on this ongoing list of our field personnel and quickly looking at it, all of them are a part of advocacy in the work that they do on their chosen fields. But can you speak to a few of those, particularly those that are being advocates for the poor, the hungry, for immigrants,
Sure.
homeless, that type of thing?
Sure. First, I want to say that I think what's important for us in CBF advocacy is we recognize advocacy as a mission field as well. I think at its best, Christian advocacy is an outgrowth of our mission work. So I think that's important to recognize. When it comes to field personnel who are doing this, I'm somewhat hesitant to start naming off ones who are doing it really well, because they all are really doing it, whether they say so or not. That work is continually ongoing. We've talked about Scarlett Jasper a little bit and her work in Kentucky. That is terrific advocacy work that she does really well. I think of another field personnel unit we've already talked about, Kim and Mark Wyatt. Their work with Welcome House, their work engaging and offering hospitality to refugees who are just arriving in the United States. My goodness, if that's not real effective advocacy on the ground, then I don't know what is. Some other field personnel who are doing this really well. I think of Leslie Ann Hicks Tommy in New York City, and the work she's doing advocating for those who are hungry and food insecure. That is something that just about every CBF church is dealing with is hunger issues and issues of food insecurity. And she's on the front lines of doing that work in her ministry at Metro and Rauschenbusch Metro Ministries there in New York. I think of Angel Pittman and her work in South Florida with Touching Miami with Love, but now is an educational advocate and what that looks like, and how she's working to make sure that our education system is equitable for Black and brown folks and for poor folks. That's yet again, if that's not effective advocacy, I don't know what is. I think of Jeff and Alicia Lee and their work around environmental advocacy in Europe. I think of Rick Burnett and what he's doing as our disaster response coordinator, but what that means for how we advocate for the environment and those kind of things. I think of Karen Morrow, Rick and Lita Sample. I could really go on and on and on and on and on with this list. Greg and Sue Smith, that's another one who they're doing great work for immigrants in Virginia. I think when you get down to it and you start looking at lists of CBF field personnel, it might be easier to try to figure out who doesn't do advocacy work as opposed to who does do it. I think that list is bigger. And they've been doing it before CBF advocacy existed. Officially CBF advocacy started in 2013. Well, we didn't just start with field personnel in 2013. Field personnel go back way longer than that. Our friend Aaron Weaver could easily hop on and tell us, the history of CBF and our missions efforts and all that stuff. So it's important to us that we work to uplift those stories of field personnel in our midst. I think that's what makes this work so powerful, is those stories that we can all connect to, and that we all have folks in our congregations who are dealing with it. It'd be somewhat silly of us to think that this isn't a personal issue, not just a church issue.
Yeah. The Andersons down in Eastern North Carolina, who partner in with First Baptist Ahoskie, who help people not just find food, but figure out how food beyond today, who help with literacy, who help in so many advocacy ways. And that's where some of that language comes from, that sometimes our congregations and individuals may not think of what they're doing as advocacy, but they're feeding the poor, or they're helping somebody learn to read. But those are advocacy words for sure. I love the Rick Burnett's ministry in South Florida. We went to South Florida there in the migrant community. There were hungry people. All the migrant workers were working on the fields, but didn't have any food. So partnered in with a local congregation and helped create all this sustainable gardening that takes place there. And it's just a beautiful story every Friday when I see his pictures on Facebook about how many people have come to get fresh produce, and not only get fresh produce, but he led them to understand to plant indigenous foods to their countries as well. That everybody didn't want a carrot, but they might want jicama. They may not want broccoli, but they wanted some Thai eggplant or whatever it is. And so it's not just about of always providing, but it's learning about what to provide in those in those concepts. And I think that kind of leads us in our next some of our next conversation, Christian and Laura, about helping our churches understand how to organize or how to create this type of committee and to go through this process. So tell us a little bit about that if you can, and some words of encouragement for our local congregations about how our congregations might want to form this type of committee, and the process that maybe you've talked about a little bit about what you've gone through, but how you can help other congregations do so. Christian, if you'll start with us.
Sure. So as Laura said before, we're new to this and we're learning as we go. And we've approached the whole thing with an attitude of humility, but I think so we can give you what our experience has been. And it seems to have been successful thus far. And as we continue to learn how to do this work more effectively. So I think it's important to clearly define to the congregation what the goals of such a committee would be. Highlight what the church has already been doing to address various issues of justice, in their approach to missions. Work to create awareness that organized advocacy is necessary to effect systemic change. And as we've said before, if we do want to truly act as advocates, we absolutely will have to get political, but we don't have to be partisan in our approach. And so I kind of went through this process before, but how it worked specifically at Greystone is there was, this education happening. And then there was a motion made from the missions committee to create this team. It was brought to the leadership council and then church in conference. So it kind of went through these different channels of how the church is organized before it was eventually presented to the entire church. There's been a covenant, as I mentioned, and that has been held to, and that's one of the most important things for the team, is to make sure that going forward, that we do keep to that covenant and keep open lines of communication with the church, and that we're informing them of all of our work. Did you want to add to that, Laura?
Sure. I think as someone who's not involved with the leadership side of the church, I think the most important thing for me through this process of being on this team that I've learned, or committee, honestly, I know they're different. I'm not sure which one we are technically. The most important thing that I've learned through it is that we're gonna argue with each other and we're going to disagree, and that's okay. I think I was scared of that at the beginning, but then, I had to remember that this isn't my office. This isn't another aspect of my life. This is my church. Like, this is my church family, and we're a family. We love each other. These, a lot of the people at this church have been a part of raising me. And I know them very well. They know me very well. We know each other's families, and we can disagree on something and we can talk it out and we can come out of it fine. Maybe we'll have our discussion and realize that we don't see eye to eye on something. And at the end of that conversation, we're still family. We're still a church family. We're still a team, and we can still move forward together. So I think just the potential fear of starting a team like this doesn't have to be as scary as we imagine. It's going to be before we start. We don't have to have all our ducks in a row to get the ball rolling. You can just start and trust each other to care for one another as we figure this out.
Laura, what you just said at the end, I think is really important. One of my biggest mentors in life talks about people go where they know they've been prepared for and cared for. And as a church and as faith leaders, we can't hope for folks to go and do this work if we're not caring for them while we're working to get them there. That's so important, Laura, and I'm glad that you raised that point. That it's just so valuable for this work. Ellen, I'm curious about a couple of things. Why do you think these types of conversations are important for your work in church engagement and missions? And then I'd love to just hear about why you think this matters so much, even in your own work. Why is the intersection of global missions and advocacy important for us and important for the church?
Yeah, thank you. I think scripturally, it's a mandate. The greatest commandment is this, that you love one another. And if we work off the tenet of that, we've got enough work to do for a lifetime in there and all. And, we're not given the mandate, choose who to love, choose who to serve. It's to love. It's to love our neighbor, and everybody is our neighbor. And so I think these conversations are extremely important for our congregations, particularly as we look at some of our mission and missional opportunities. As I work with our congregations, particularly in mission committees, some of the first questions I ask is, why are you partnering with these groups or these organizations or whatever? And lots of times the question is because we always have. That's the language for the church, because that's how we've always done it. And so it's hard to break some of that toxicity when it has such long history. And there's a little bit of fear that we're going to disenfranchise somebody who may love that particular mission opportunity, but yet we discover that the church isn't really buying into it anymore. We do it just because we always have. And so having these types of conversations with our missions committees, with our church staffs, with the congregation as a whole, is really pivotal in the future of the church. We all deal in the reality that that congregations are declining, and we have to figure out how not to be all things to all people, but to be the best we can, that want to encourage people to come to be a part of us, and to follow Christ's mandate, again, to love. And, the most used scripture, I think, is Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice? Interesting that that's first, to be about justice for the poor, for the neglected, for the orphan. I myself am adopted, and so I'm a strong advocate for that. I'm a strong advocate for foster care and adoption as well. And as I always say, we really do turn out well. And also, I encourage you to do that.
You turned out okay, Ellen. You turned out okay.
There are days. To do justice, to love mercifully, and to walk humbly with God. It's a beautiful three-piece. There again, another Trinity symbol for us of what Christ is mandating us to do, and the local congregation to have more of those congregations of honesty and moving beyond what has always been the paradigm that we followed, but figuring out how to really be the Church of Jesus there in that community. And again, maybe a justice committee isn't for every congregation, but it's for a lot of congregations. But it doesn't even have to have that name. It can be something else that's applicable to the work that they're doing, or that they're willing to partner in with. And missions is all about justice and advocacy. It's all about the other person. It's not about me. It's not about what I can get from it. But we all know we've had those mountaintop experiences as youth. If you were fortunate to go on youth trips or big mission trips where, you go and you've changed the world, you feel like, and you're going to be so different when you come home. You're never going to complain about the road because you've been to Ishigawan, Guatemala, at 11,000 feet where the road is just bumpy the whole way. And you're never going to complain about the road again until you land in that first pothole. And then you're back in the reality of it. And so having a committee like this, being an advocate in your local congregation, really isn't about that one-time change. It's about that lifetime change that happens within us and for us, therefore happening within the whole community, therefore happening around the globe. And I think our field personnel do a really great job of that. Really focusing on the work of the people, of where they're living. They're not there to create new opportunities, but to walk alongside. And I think that's one of the pieces that CBF does well in that, is that as we appoint field personnel, it's always finding a way to partner in. And it's not just about our field personnel either. It's about opportunities we have with Fellowship Southwest. It's opportunities that we have with 19 state and regional organizations, with our scholars. The work that Davida does is a real entree into the futuring of the church, which is engagement, which is missions as well. So my role, I think, is some of the most important at CBF, of course, because it is about missions and church engagement and helping us create those long-term presence. Not with just our field personnel, but in our own communities too. But figuring out how our field personnel can teach us what to do, how to listen, and how to be an encourager in the midst of all that.
Yeah, the how to listen thing we've talked about so far significantly already, and I can't underscore its importance enough about listening. I also think of the opportunities I've gotten as a part of CBF advocacy and the people that I've gotten to meet and the significance they've played on my life. I think of, I've already talked about Bill and Sandra Baxley, who are really familiar, who are members of Greystone, and Bill's the chair of this team, and their heart for things like this. I think of people like Sharon Felton in Kentucky, who works tirelessly every day to advocate for folks in her community and in the state. I think of Rachel Shepard in Florida and the work she's doing with Together for Hope. But the work she's done around payday lending to fight for some of those things. It's the people are oftentimes what make this even more special too. I think that's so true. I'm also curious, Christian and Laura, what advice you might offer to congregations to better integrate advocacy into the life of their church. You all are on this journey now, and you've started this journey. You're a little bit of a ways down the road on the journey. But what about for folks that want to start it tomorrow? Like, what's the one piece of advice you might give to those folks? Then I'll let whoever wants to go first. Yeah.
I can go first.
Go ahead, Laura.
I think that I would say the most important, like very first thing right off the bat, I would say is talk to your youth group, listen to your youth group, talk to your college students, listen to them. Honestly, they probably are more involved with advocacy than the older members of the congregation. And, that might just be because they're young and woke, but it might also be because their whole lives are dedicated to learning right now. They have time. They have time to learn. That's all they're doing is learning. So use that to your advantage. They're a huge asset. Use their knowledge, their information, what they're learning, and just kind of use that as a resource that already exists. Like, you don't have the older members of the congregation, anyone out of college age doesn't have to go searching for all of that information when you've got a bunch of high schoolers and college students and even middle schoolers who are thrilled to tell you everything they already know. So use them. Let them be involved. They're so smart.
And also, I would say that's a wonderful plug for a beautiful expression of intergenerational ministry in our congregations too, Laura. So thanks for that. Christian, what do you got?
I would say, from my perspective, the one single most important thing, more general, would be just to make sure, again, I've already touched on this a couple of times, but that if you're going to be creating a group like this, it's really important to communicate with the entire congregation and keep them informed of what's going on with the group. But from my own personal perspective in the position that I'm in, and I'm fortunate to be able to work in a position that is intergenerational by its very nature. I work with all different ages as a music and worship minister. And so I didn't really touch on this before, but speaking about music specifically, music is a way of knowing that's deeply tied to memory, and it's a primary way in which we remember and experience God. So throughout our faith's history, song has been a primary vehicle for expressing all of our deepest emotions as we've learned how to talk to and about God and our spiritual experience. Congregational singing in particular, which obviously occurs among all ages, is an intimately relational event during which we come into communion with each other and with God. And so as we sing together, we're kind of developing a shared sonic canon. And so it's really important that we are singing what we believe. I think I would agree with this, and I would imagine most people would, that music has the power to transform hearts and minds. And so what type of transformation are we looking to bring about? And so we need to be singing songs that affirm our faith, that reflect our values, that draw us together and inspire us to be better advocates for the marginalized and oppressed. And so our music, I think, should not only reflect who we are, but also who we want to be and what we want to live into together as faith communities. So I say that as somebody who primarily works in the music side of things, but I think that could apply to any area of the church. So we need to be thinking about not only, we need to know where we are, but also have in mind what we want to live into together as a community.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And immediately I thought of songs as you're saying that, the songs that I cling to for my own calling when I was 17 was at church camp, and it was "Oh How He Loves You and Me," and so I get weepy anytime that's going to be, because it takes me back to that place. But two that really became really pivotal in my ministry and helped transition a lot of that from the inner focus to the outer focus for my own personal ministry was the servant song. And then For Everyone Born, A Place at the Table. I mean, that's just I would love to sing both of those songs every Sunday, but I'd be out of tissues again, by the end of worship, because they both just are such powerful words for me that draw me in, and not only draw me in, but cause me to react, that call me out to do more. To take care of other people. And as we've talked about in CBF life, it's not just enough to provide a seat at the table for people. You've got to constantly provide that and let them know they always have that seat. It's not just a one invitational piece. There's always room at the table. And as that song says, that it is. One of the many things that we have at CBF is we aren't short on resources a lot of times. because we have people producing lots of good material for us and for our congregations. We have lots of good mission material that's available on our website at cbf.net. And if you just type over into resources, you'll find a lot of that. And there's stuff for youth and children as well. And it'll always feature some of our field personnel and the ways that they're in the midst of advocacy as well. We offer prayers of the people. We offer mission bites. Mission Bites is a weekly mission piece that's just a 90 to 100 word piece from our field personnel that tells the story about something that's happened just recently in their ministry. And it's always a beautiful story that can be used as in your worship guide or on your prayer list or as a mission moment during your worship. But one of the other newer pieces that we have is something that John Mark and his department helped do, and that was the advocacy toolkit. So John Mark, tell us a little bit about that and how people might use that and where they can find a way to purchase that.
Sure, absolutely. So several years ago, CBF Advocacy and Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, entered into a partnership about beginning congregational advocacy ministries in local congregations. So the mission of advocacy is the name of our congregational advocacy toolkit, written by Stephen Reeves and Katie Murray. Katie Murray was on staff at Wilshire for doing congregational advocacy like this, and she and Stephen co-wrote this resource. This resource offers concrete ways for churches to engage in the work of advocacy. I think in some situations we get resources that don't offer immediate steps that we can take. That's not the case with the mission of advocacy. It offers you almost a step-by-step guide into how your church can get into doing this work. And if your church is already doing this work, it offers steps for how you can improve doing this work. I think that's what makes it such a valuable resource for us. Also in there you will find resources for how you can talk about all sorts of different issues that come up when you're talking about advocacy. Issues about losing your tax exempt status and how to avoid that, how to refrain from doing those kinds of things, and then offers issue specific resources as well. Payday lending, immigration reform, criminal justice reform, education, environment, the list goes on and on. Not only that, but issues for how to do this well in small group Bible studies and how to integrate some of this stuff into your worship experience as well, with prayers and litanies that are already written, a guide of some hymns that are justice oriented, so you don't have to go out and find them if you don't need to. A really valuable resource for congregations, a really great way to help congregations plug in. And you can find that on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes and Noble. It was published by our partner, Good Faith Media. You can find out more about it at Good Faith Media's website. I think it's goodfaithmedia.org. Not only can you find our resource there, our book there, but you can find plenty of other ones too. They're also great that have a lot to do with advocacy as well. So it's a great resource. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Love to chat with folks more about it and point them in the right direction.
Thank you so much for that. Two other resources I just want to mention as our time is drawing nigh. We're getting ready to roll out our Speakers Bureau later this month. And the Speakers Bureau is about 15 or 16 people in our office, as well as our field personnel, that are going to be available to help lead worship, to preach, to speak, to do a mission moment, to do a Wednesday night program, to speak to your youth group, to meet with any of the weekday mission groups that are meeting, to your children's programming, that kind of thing. And so later this month, you'll receive an email rollout of that kind of about the Speakers Bureau and the link on our website. And you'll see a lovely montage of all of us on there and what some of our topics are, a little bit about us and how to invite us. And so we hope that more of our congregationals will be able to do that. We know that we will remain virtual for a bit longer, but eventually we hope to be back in person with you, and hopefully to get to be in your congregations with you as well. And the second thing that's part of my work, John Mark, that when we were talking about my work specifically, is we're getting ready, hopefully by May, to been updating our mission portfolio. And it's a way for our congregations to really have a holistic look at our missions and the way that your congregation is doing missions. And it gives the opportunity to a step-by-step process of how to really look at those and see what are those toxic things that we need to give up, things that maybe just are out of the season of what we're doing anymore, but to embrace some of the things that we are doing and how to move that over into a more balanced missional portfolio for our congregation. So you'll begin to hear more about that as well. So Laura and Christian, you've been really excellent in helping us understand a little bit more about this. And it's always best to learn from somebody who's in the midst of this and experiencing it from the growing pains as well as all the successes that takes place. And in these last 2 minutes together, I'll put you on the spot for this. What's a word of encouragement for our congregations to really be about the spirit of justice and why this is an important piece for worship?
I mean, I think if you go to scripture, that's all the encouragement you need. And I really appreciate what you said before about, the mandate to love your neighbor. I think the more we realize and let it be known that that doesn't, there's no exceptions to that. And so the more we can highlight that in our worship and in the ways that we're active in the community, then I think that's going to result in us being better advocates. And I also, we talked a lot about listening, and I think that's just, that's one of the most important things as well. So it's, it's tireless work, I think, but at the same time, it's what we're called to do as Christians. So,
yeah, thank you.
And I think my encouragement would be just, we can do it. Not only do we have to do it, but we can, and none of us have to do it alone. We're not one person churches. We're a church family. Every congregation is its own very large family, and we can rely on one another and rely on the bonds we formed with each other and walk hand in hand and do this together. So it's not as scary as it might seem.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's really, it's not just an educational journey for our congregations, but it's a spiritual journey. And that's what the congregation is about as well. And it's not always about me getting what I want, but it's about recognizing what's best for the whole and what's best for the world. And that goes back to the scriptural piece too, is to love our neighbor. So CBF is here to help. I know Christian and Laura will be glad to get an email from you or a question, and you could find Christian's contact information at Greystone's website as well, or in the comment section, his music site's listed there as well. But thank you for listening and participating in our conversation today. CBF doesn't get everything right, and we can't do everything for all people we know, but the things that we can do is to listen, to learn together, and to walk together, as Christ said. So thank you for your participation today, John Mark, Christian, and Laura, and look forward to more in-depth conversations with you as well. Our April conversation focuses on creation care, and Sam Harrell and some of our field personnel will be a part of that CBF conversation on April 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time again. And we're going to look at how creation care in their areas happens, and not that we can replicate it, but what we can do in our own congregational communities, and how we can continue to serve God together. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for all that you are, and don't forget to love all people. Thank you.